On October 9th, 2021, the Atheist Network Group, or TANG, hosted an online version of their event, Better. This conference is to talk about how to improve conversation and discourse between atheists and theists, and in it, the headliner, Seth Andrews, took questions from the audience. I asked him, what, if anything, did atheists do that made the conversation worse, that made it harder for atheists or anti-theists to achieve their goal of trying to reduce oppression by religion on education, on our public discourse, and on politics. This was his answer.
I blanch at the religion is a mental illness stuff. I despise those arguments. Religion is not a mental illness. Religion is an idea. And the hugely intelligent people hold to religious beliefs and ideas. It's not about being mentally ill. My IQ, my brain capacity did not change when I was a believer to when I was an atheist. I hate that. I hate that when people say atheism is, and then they go off on this long tirade about how you are automatically rational about everything and how you manage to grow up instead of being just a child. I mean, I hate those. Because atheism is simply the non-belief in gods. That's all it is. It doesn't mean you're a rational person. It doesn't mean you're smart. It doesn't mean that you are a humanist. It doesn't really guarantee anything else about you. It just means you got essentially correct one of the easiest questions in the universe, which is there any evidence for any God anywhere? And so I really get tired of those. I've gotten more and more weary of the confrontational, in-your-face kind of snark against... I'm not talking about the major players. I still go after a lot of the big apologists. Pastor Greg Locke, I give that man no quarter whatsoever. But when it comes to our interactions with everyday believers, I lament the ones where they're just trying to belittle and mock and go for the kill and to rally people to make them feel stupid. Look at me and how superior and smart I am and how dumb the religious person is. Which changes no minds. It helps no one in the conversation. It only really makes things harder, I think, in the long game. If our goal is to try to convince people that maybe we have some legitimate reasons to be concerned about these religious claims, we're not going to insult them into enlightenment. We're not going to browbeat them into enlightenment. We need to have conversations with them.
We've often discussed how to deal with uncomfortable discussions and with everything from race relations to homophobia to transphobia, and how, as an atheist, does someone have an honest and fruitful discussion with a theist? Tonight, to lend his voice to this discussion, we have Mr. Seth Andrews. Welcome to In Time. Hello, and welcome, Isandring, and welcome, Mr. Andrews. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invite. It's funny, I was watching that little clip that you just played, and man, my voice must have been shredded that day. At the end of the day, it usually is. I'm in the studio quite a bit, and like I've just been recording chapters for an audiobook, and I'm prepping shows and doing other interviews. And, sometimes you can really tell, I sound really, but, I meant what I said. I sometimes lament how we approach other people, especially online. And so this was a discussion. Tonight's discussion was something that I was eager to participate in, and I'm grateful for the invitation.
Well, thank you, sir. I think it's interesting. We're talking a little bit about, so this has been a topic that we've discussed many times, is how does the media sometimes delight in fostering, unfortunately, sort of negative connotations of either Republicans, conservatives, liberals. They make money off of. Hold on a second. I'm having an echo in my headset. I'll have to deal with that in a second. So they and not only that, but we feel better, I think, sometimes by belittling others and by saying, well, I have the correct position and you don't. I don't think that necessarily fosters the discussion. Now, you were a theist for at least half your life, so it seems to me that you've actually been on very much on both sides of this. So I can see that you must have at least some connection to theists who still believe and find themselves either unwilling or unable to come out of it, and to atheists who say, well, yeah, but can you see the harm they're doing? And so how do you, when you see that on both sides, how do you resolve that for people, or how do you discuss that with people?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'll try to be brief. But I have a lot of compassion for people who are I hear them and I hear what they do, and I see a lot of myself in it. By the way, I'm hearing an echo of myself in the headphones, by the way, so that's why I'm pausing. But I also think that there's a time to get good and angry, and there's a time to call things out. Like, I don't think the Republicans and the Democrats are on equal footing when it comes to things like human rights and science education and the treatment of non-Christians and the promotion or the resistance to Christian nationalism, the anti-Constitution overrun of a particular theist sect saying that the United States belongs to their specific religion. I mean, if you look at Republicans and Democrats, hell, I'm a party is perfect, knowing that there were a ton of problems. But I also know that it's a false equivalence to say, well, both sides, the religious person and the non-religious person. Well, depending on how they came to their belief, but that's not necessarily an equivalence position. If someone says, look, I don't believe in a God because I haven't seen any evidence, I think that's a better position to take, especially in light of the absolutely overwhelmingly debunked theist religions, the Abrahamic faiths, etc. We know they aren't true. We know they didn't happen. And then when we see damage done to people, we know that it harms people, bad ideas, the indoctrination of children, the stripping away of human rights, this discrimination against everybody from non-Christians to non-heteros to whatever. So, there's a time to really go after the hard targets. And so I'm not ever saying that. In the everyday, when we see people go after each other, I wasn't mocked out of my faith. Someone didn't point a finger at me and call me stupid and all those things. And I said, oh, you know what? You're absolutely right. I have been an absolute idiot. I now will reverse all of my positions and follow you into enlightenment. It just doesn't happen that way. Mockery has its place. On the larger stage, when you're not going after an individual, I think it's important to roast the sacred cows. And I think it's important for people to see us do it. I loved watching Christopher Hitchens go after religion, lampoon religion, skewer religion. He wasn't coming after me personally, but I was able to watch him do it from the wings, and I learned from that. And in a way, it empowered me. He's a great example because this week marks the 10th anniversary of his death. And I did a tribute show about Hitch. But as far as people, when did we stop treating people like people? When did they just become the two-dimensional avatar? When did they just become the gotcha? And when did we decide that we're going to tackle hugely complex issues in 280 characters on Twitter? Nuance is dead. Nuance is, or it's on life support, maybe. And I've grieved that in my own life. I've grieved it in my activism. I have done my best, or am doing my best to try to monitor that in my own life. You know, I'll go after the Greg Locks. I'll go after the Ben Shapiros. I'll go after the Donald Trumps. I'll go after the Franklin Grahams and the Joel Osteens, et cetera. But I'll also, when I'm dealing with people in the one-on-ones, realize that I'm talking to someone who I don't know who they are. I don't know what their background is. I don't know what their baggage is, what they brought to the equation. I don't know what their mental state is. I don't know any of those things. And so I've become softer in at least my initial approaches to try to humanize my interlocutor in the hopes that something productive might actually come out of it, you know. And if nothing else, it's been easier on my heart. You know, I haven't found myself feeling like I've just been rapped on the knuckles with a hammer over and over. It's helped me to restore a little bit of my own humanity out there in the online ether.
You know, one of the things that I've come across a lot recently, especially with the advent of social media, is it seems like people have been reduced to one specific set of arguments or beliefs, and that's who they are. You know, if you're a Republican, you believe this, and that's your entire being. You know, and one of the things that I keep trying to push back is people try and stick me in a box. You know, oh, you're a conservative, you must be a Republican, you must be all of these things. And it's like, no, I have quite a wide range of beliefs, and all of those things are just small parts of me. It's like, I may support this, and that's just a small part of who I am as a person. And I see this happening a lot. That anytime you find somebody you disagree with, they're suddenly that's all there is to their personality. You're just a homophobe, or you're just a bigot, or you're just a white nationalist, or you're just, and it may not even be true. But the entire person has been boiled down to that one thing, and we can now dismiss you, and you're just an evil person. And I think that it does horrible things to people's psyches as a whole. What do you think would be the best approach to try and get people out of doing that, and recognizing that people are very complex and hold very complex ideas? Because that seems to be lacking.
Well, one of the challenges that we have, and it's a legitimate challenge, a legitimate point, I think, is I used to be a Fox News conservative Christian back in the day, okay? And even if I had voted for Donald Trump only because at the time I was anti-abortion, and that was my single issue, like I hated the guy, and I just didn't, I thought he was a cad and a con man and a grifter, but the right to life kind of an argument which had been pounded into my head as an evangelical Christian. That was it. This is about life and death. So I would have voted on that one issue. Well, I wouldn't fit into that sort of hardcore MAGA flag waving, hard nationalist box. I would have still been a conservative Republican voter, but I wasn't a cookie cutter kind of guy. I mean, I had my reasons, but it wasn't my neighbor's reasons, which wasn't their neighbor's reasons, etc. But I understand some of the frustration, because regardless of what my motivations and intent were, the results were that a man was elected who did tremendous harm, who enabled white Christian nationalism in this country, totally pander to the evangelicals, helped to stack the Supreme Court to the point where now we've got human rights issues on the bubble. So the result is pretty awful. So I understand, the people who say intent really isn't the point. The result is the point. I think these two things can sort of dance together. I think we can look at intent, but also realize that, even the people with the best intentions can do some tremendous harm. Nobody thinks they're the villain in their own story. Everybody thinks they're the hero of their own story, but that doesn't necessarily make their deeds heroic. As far as humanizing them, in my mind, I think we have to train ourselves to take a breath. I used to be terrible at this. When I would get online and I would see somebody who had a terrible idea, horrible idea, I'm already angrily mashing at my keyboard. I'm just, I'm doing this, and I've got a long Facebook diatribe, and I'm writing a blog post, and I'm going to do a video, and maybe a response video, and I'm just getting crap, just going at you. And I had to train myself to just stop, take a breath. And questions become, who is this person? Are they trolling me? If they're trolling me, are they worth my time and attention? Because they want my time and attention, right? Am I going to pay them off with that? Am I going to stop the important work that's being done and gift them this spotlight? Why would I do that? Should I just ignore them and move on? That's often the best revenge. Don't give them any oxygen. Is it somebody who's acting in bad faith? Will they be open to a good conversation? Do you need to simply correct the record once? Just say something that is the refutation, maybe provide a source of some kind, put yourself on the record, and then move on and not get sucked into the black hole, you know? Are they someone who might be a tremendously good person who has a bad idea? Hell, I fit that description. I had a ton of terrible ideas, but I was a good man. I tried my best to do the honorable thing. You know, I think we have to ask ourselves these questions. We stair-step ourselves through this sort of list of what if, do I know, what do I know, what do I not know, who are they, what can we determine, what are their intentions, what is the benefit of engaging? And then after we've run through that gauntlet, we can decide when and how to approach them. I have really become a fan of the Socratic method, where we can use questions to make sure that anyone making a claim is having to meet a burden of proof. We're not pointing a finger and saying you're a dumbass. We point a finger and say, okay, I need you to tell me, how did you come to that position? Can you source this? Can you document this? Can you back this up? And, you know, it's interesting, too, because I've gotten into even some heated exchanges online. And I've looked at it after the fact, and I've come back to someone on the internet and I've said, you know, I'm sorry that I got snarky here. In this statement, I was just being snarky, and you deserved better than my sarcasm here. And I should have done better. And I'm going to make a pledge to myself to try and do better next time. I've actually done this on a few occasions. And it's amazing to see the temperature of that conversation change, because 8 times out of 10, they'll come back and they'll say, you know what, it's okay. I got kind of hot myself. You're really a good guy. I know we're good people. It's all good. Everybody just starts to chill, you know. And if we can operate in good faith with each other and start talking to each other more like we would over a cup of coffee, instead of angry hammering at the keyboards against this, you know, dehumanized other, using a pause, using the breath, running through the list, seeing what qualifications are there. I think these are helpful tools as we engage people in the culture.
Yeah, I've run across several different people that opine about why discourse may not be to the level that we used to see. I personally think that a lot of the problem is the very fact that we're behind keyboards. We're not seeing the person's face. We're not right there. There's no immediate danger to offending somebody. It's like, you know, you can offend somebody all you want, and there's no danger of them reaching through that screen and punching you in the nose. And we also lose quite a bit of that subconscious analyzing of facial features, seeing how somebody's reacting. Are we making them mad? Or, you know, and a lot of context is lost through text. It's like you don't know the tone that somebody's taking. And I think that's harmed us quite a lot. You know, we don't really think that we're, at least on a subconscious level, I don't think we're really aware that we're actually talking to a real person on the other end of the line, because they're not there in front of us.
Man, that's so good.
Do you think that it's going to get any better?
You are spot on. You can't see the wink in my eye, or whether or not I'm smiling or frowning, or you can't hear the inflections in my voice. And you will treat me a hell of a lot. I mean, I'm not speaking to you specifically, but in the abstract, if I'm speaking to someone else on Twitter or whatever, they'll handle me a lot differently online than they would if we were side by side, sitting in a car together, sitting over a dinner table together. And I found that an interesting social experiment, because I've spent a lot of time with people who I am diametrically opposed to in terms of my values. And if I'd run into them on the internet and they had just been some avatar, you know, who knows what I might have done or said. But if I'm sitting across the table, I notice that those conversations are actually more conversational, you know. And you said something earlier, not to derail too much, but you said something about how there's a real benefit online, like marketers and people looking for clickbait income or attention. Conflict is their oxygen. So the more we snipe and snark and argue with each other, the more nasty we are, the more clickbaity we are, the more we're hammering comments and other comments and responses and activating and reactivating. The more we do that, the more they benefit, whether it's a website or a news organization or whatever. We are being manipulated. And you see that many times in the things that populate your feed. The algorithms send you something that hits a button that's close to your heart because they know our preferences. And before you know it, we engage. And oh, look, there are advertisements all over this page. And oh, look, I just gave them plenty of attention. Conflict is king for a great many organizations. And we have to be aware of that. I think being aware that we are being manipulated is something that's critical if we're going to not be manipulated. It's almost like getting out of a cult. In order to escape, you got to realize you're in a cult, and understanding and acknowledging that is, I think, first step out. So,
well, yeah, and I think human beings are evolutionarily wired to pay more attention to negative things than the positive things. It draws our attention quite a lot more because, generally speaking, negatives have a more profound impact on our lives than positives. Like, you can't get too positive. It's not like you're going to die of happiness, but if something negative is going on, very quickly you could have your life in danger. So I think we're really wired to pay really close attention to the negative things and hyper focus on those things. And I think that it's been, just as you said, taken, exploited, maybe not specifically, vindictively or with malice of forethought, but just recognizing that, people are drawn to this. I mean, we see this in news. When you watch the news, you don't see nearly as many positive stories about this heroic person. I mean, they have to be pretty heroic to really make, at least on a national level. I mean, I see plenty of, feel-good stories on like local channels, but rarely on national. I mean, that has to be pretty outstanding to make that. I think that the negative far outweighs it because it draws people's attention, and of course, they're driven by advertisers.
Yeah, I mean, 100,000 airplanes land and or take off and land without incident today. But, it'll be the one plane crash that makes the headline. And I think, too, when we live in this fire hose in our faces of real-time information from all around the world, that can be overwhelming. We're not wired to have this much jammed into our eyes, into our hearts, into our minds. And that can be overwhelming. Because, we are presented on a second-by-second basis with what seems like the worst that the world has to offer. There's crime, there's corruption, there's rapist in the Catholic Church, somebody abused an animal, there's wildfires in Australia, the Christian nationalists have smashed into the Capitol building. I mean, just over and over and over, big and small, local, national, global, there's always some sort of a crisis being jammed right at us. And I think, man, that can sure start to really produce some calluses and scars, and it can really affect us. And I'm not saying we turn a blind eye to all of the things that are happening around us that we need to be engaged with, but I'm also very, very aware of the fact that all of these negative stories are not life. There's more than this horribleness going on all around me. And I've got to remember that there is much good, much to be celebrated, and life's too short to spend it keyboard mashing against some anonymous other who lives halfway around the world who's just trying to push my buttons. That's not how I want to spend the years of my life, my finite life on planet Earth.
Well, you are your habits, right? That's one of those where I'm like, I'll only spend 30 seconds on Twitter. That's all. 4 hours later, and you do that time and time and time again. And guess what you are? You're the guy on Twitter that everybody successfully trolls. Yeah. I think
I used to come downstairs on certain days, and Natalie would be like, she would see my jaw set, and she'd be like, "You've been arguing on the internet, haven't you?" I used to be horrible at it. Like back when I first came out of religion, I was so keyed up. I was so angry. I felt so cheated. I was like a coiled spring, and I would engage anybody anywhere. And I don't know how many times I argued and fought and counter apologetics. And this argument's wrong. And here's why the Bible's crap. And, oh, I can't believe you're doing. I mean, I was just nonstop against who? I didn't even know who these people were, but I would spend hours. And after a while, I noticed it started to change me. There was a change within me. a hardness that began to develop, a cynicism about life and about people that I didn't like about myself. And it took me a few years to break the cycle of that hamster wheel of rage, keyboard mashing rage. And now I've just trained myself. It's rare that I will get involved in that. It's rare because hardly anything ever comes of it. It sucks up huge portions of your life. And honestly, it usually kills a part of your heart. And I don't want that for me.
So a buddy of mine, Christopher Mowdy, he's a psychology professor at Rutgers, has come up with an interesting new concept, which is the call-in culture. So what he says is, we have right now a call-out culture where we take somebody, we say, hey, we're calling you out. We're ganging up on you. We're saying all of us disagree with what you're doing, and you are being called out by all of these people. And what he says is what we need is a call-in culture. And I think explicitly, maybe even for just one of those reasons. A lot of the people who are behaving in ways that are either toxic or damaging to society are in fact attempting to express that kind of pain, and they're not being engaged. I don't know if Richard Dawkins, well, for him, that might be another one. But one of the things I found interesting was when one of the first tweets that he did was he did what everybody does, which is tweeted something reasonably idiotic, and that may have been true, but, belied a lot underneath that really needed to be addressed. But instead of owning that, when people called him out, he did what everybody does. Double down and double down and double down again. Now, I've never met Dawkins, but I do think that he wants to be a good guy, and I think he does want to be on the right side of things. But when you start calling him out like that, and it's not about are you going to cancel him successfully or not, nobody's going to cancel him. It didn't do necessarily all that much damage to him, but it made it impossible to call him in and say, listen, you said some things. Let's talk about this. Let's have an honest conversation. Let's not use charged words, and let's have a conversation and see if, as somebody who I think would rather be on the right side of things, maybe this is something where we can say, where are we disagreeing?
There is, like Richard Dawkins, his book, God Delusion, was one of the things that helped me get out of religion. It's one of those life-changing books that it just changed my life, right? And that will never, no circumstance, no dumbass thing he does or says will ever change the fact that back in 2008, the God Delusion helped to change my life, okay? I look at Richard and I'm just like, shut the fuck up. Like, stop. What the hell are you doing? What the hell are you thinking? It's the stuff he is saying and doing is making everything harder. Yeah. And I understand what you're saying about people who immediately, they pile on, and it's hard to come to his defense because he is so influential and, for lack of a better word, so powerful that it's not like these people are going to really, it's not like he's going to be harmed by them. I don't see him as a victim in any way. But I understand that, and I agree. I think Richard genuinely, he's one of those guys who genuinely feels he's on the side of right. And he is acting on that because he is an activist by nature. And he doesn't think he's the villain in his own story. And these are hard conversations that need to be had in some meaningful and productive way. The challenge is, he did double down, I think, when everybody came after him, but he may have doubled down anyway. I can't read his mind. But, he hasn't stacked the deck really in his own favor. I think doors have been open to him to, hey, you need to have some conversations with the people that you're speaking about, and you need to evolve your thinking about this. And he doesn't seem all that interested. But I was talking to Dr. Hector Garcia, who's a psychologist, about tribalism and how, we have in-groups and out-groups, and the in-group is always going to go after the out-group, right? We're righteous, we're right, we're good. They are bad, horrible, evil, terrible people. We are the hero, they are the villain and the enemy, And so that's gone on since humans have gone on. But there's another phenomenon that I find interesting too, and that is how tribes treat people who are within the tribe who don't line up in a specific way, whether they're legitimately wrong or simply perceived as wrong. There's a set of really harsh punitive measures that are in place for someone who's in the in-group who is not abiding by the in-group rules. And sometimes I think that's beneficial. You know, you got to pull out the weeds. You've got to root out the bad seeds. You've got to excise the cancer. I get that. But in other contexts out there, not the Dawkins context, in other contexts, I have seen that there might be somebody who's part of our group, call it the free thought movement or, you know, a specific political party. I don't know, pick an in-group of any kind. And they don't go along. There's a dogmatic attitude among some people who say, well, you're not in-grouping in the way that we think you should be in-grouping. You have passed our kind of purity test, or you're wrong, and that makes you bad. And if you're bad, you're garbage, and now you're out. And it's interesting to watch in-groups sort of turn on their own whenever there is what should be some positive, constructed conflict. I'm a believer in conflict. I think good ideas have to come out of conflict. If everybody lined up and agreed, there's something wrong. We have to hash it out. Iron has to sharpen iron. We have to figure out which ideas are the best one. Well, how do you do that if you never clash, if you never have these hard discussions, if you never converse or argue or whatever? And I think in groups, whatever our family, community, tribes, whatever those happen to be, and we are a tribal species, I think we've really failed when it comes to being a little more charitable and having more productive, constructive conversations, listening more, engaging in productive ways more with people that we are concerned about who exist in our group. Instead, we tend to throw them in the trebuchet and we toss them out into oblivion and say, you're dead to me. I'm not saying that never should be done, but it sure is done a lot. You know, it's done a lot. You passed my purity test. You are now garbage. And we toss them out into oblivion. And boy, the internet's loaded with that stuff, you know.
Let me get a super chat. I do want to get that. Let me do a super chat real quick, and then Sinister Porpoise, $5 super chat. The Sinister Porpoise 2024. When you think of sinister porpoises, think of the Sinister Porpoise. Sinister, thank you as always. We really appreciate your support. Thank you. I appreciate your super chat. Thank you so much. Yes, Isandring, what were you going to say?
I think we're seeing what we're seeing is a product of our being victimized by our own evolution. You know, we evolved as a tribal species, and tribal species that grew too fractious failed. Those that were able to band together of like minds, they succeeded. And we've moved now into a period where we've largely removed ourselves from natural selection, most natural selection pressures, and we've kind of moved beyond the need for that. Yet we're still wired, you know, to have our tribes, and those tribes need to be, you know, in line with each other, or we risk failure. And I'm wondering, is it just not been enough time for us to move past that? Is it something that we can overcome, or are we always going to fall victim to trying to make sure that our own groups all stay together, and when one person dissents, not just essentially loading them up in the trebuchet and launching them over the castle walls at the evil dwarves coming at us?
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges we have is that, I mean, we were always tribal. The internet has allowed us to make millions of micro tribes, right? I mean, we can find somebody who lines up with us in such a tight way. We can create these tiny little close-knit pods of near absolute agreement. And, you know, if all of a sudden something goes awry there, we can go find another small knit pod of close agreement. And, you know, there's an isolating aspect to that I think is really working against us. And I don't know what the solution is to that. You know, I'm interested. It's one of the reasons that I support interfaith charity works is that I have more in common with a ton of God believers than I do with some atheists, right? If we look in terms of our values, I had Rachel Laser from the American Humanist Association, had her on my show. Well, she is a God believer. But I mean, I don't know. Is she a God believer? She practices Judaism. I don't know how strong her faith is, But she and I both are a humanist. We believe that we need to solve each other's problems. I had Dr. Kristen Dumais, who wrote the book Jesus and John Wayne, on my show, an atheist show. She's a Bible-believing Christian. She's a total believer, but she's an opponent of Christian nationalism, and she totally resists this God and country jingoism that has taken over. And in so many ways, Dr. Dumais and I have more in common, much more in common than we ever had in disagreement. And I think that's true in so many instances. I mean, we are the human tribe. Yeah, there are awful agents. There are some terrible, terrible, terrible people out there. And I'm not saying that they don't exist. I'm not saying we have to give them quarter. I'm not saying that we all to get together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and drink the Kool-Aid together or have a snow cone or whatever metaphor you want to use. But I am saying that I'll bet that a lot of the people that we stand opposed to on key issues, religion or whatever, issues that relate to our identity, I'll bet if we were to get down and talk about life and how we feel and loving our families and wanting good in the world and all those types of things, we might have a whole lot more in common with the people that we have vilified. And I don't know how to fix that on the internet, because the internet is depersonalizing by nature. Its design is to reduce the three-dimensional flesh and blood, living, breathing, feeling, eating, sleeping, whatever human being, and create this little 2D text box with a picture that might not even be you, with a name that might not even be yours. And now you're another. Now you're impersonal. Now you're a thing. And I don't know how to fix that, except to realize that it's happening, to take that breath, be conscious of it, pause, and then try to fill in those blanks ourselves before we engage.
So Sinister Porpoise, another $2. This concept is called a filter bubble or an echo chamber, which is another one where, in the echo chamber, you're rewarded for, positively contributing to whatever the dogma is, whatever that. And there's echo chambers for atheists, there's echo chambers for theists, Republicans, liberals. There's echo chambers, and I think
that's not popular too. Like, I'm a proud liberal, right? And it's because I fall on the liberal side when it comes to all these issues, whether it's taxation for high income brackets or abolishing the death penalty or right to die issues or the right of a woman to choose or LGBTQ rights or whatever. Okay. I just find myself, I fall on, if someone asks me, I'm like, yeah, I'm a liberal guy. Right. I just lined up in that category because of the way I think, the way that my value system lays out. But there are some people who will call themselves liberal who can be just as dogmatic as anybody in the MAGA camp, as anybody in a cult. This idea that somehow we're immune to dogmatism and purity tests and being totally intolerant and not listening to people and not engaging in productive ways because, we're noble and we're doing it right and we don't have to ask any more questions and we're not going to bother and those people are garbage, blah, blah, blah. This idea that we're immune to the darker shades of the human condition is just naive. It's stupid. We're human beings. We have biases. We can be susceptible to misinformation. We can be wrong. and
it's the very thing that theists do that atheists accuse them of, right? I mean, the thing that bothers me most about is the theists who never admit that they're wrong and that there couldn't possibly not be a God or all that, it's the same, yeah.
They're not listening. You know what? They just go la 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 la, and then they say that atheists never do that. Well, trust me, I've been doing this a long time. And I've seen people in every tribe who just have become dogmatic is the best word that I can use, intolerant. And man, I don't want that. I don't think that's healthy. I think, nuance cannot be dead. If we're going to engage other people, we can't dehumanize them. And, how do you change the culture if you're not engaging in a productive way? And, that's just a tribal thing. I just wanted to bring up that point because I found it interesting.
Well, and
well, yeah,
please.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the thing that worries me most either. It's like if discourse is going to break down and we can't be civil to each other anymore. I mean, even if you're diametrically opposed to somebody's position, I think they have an atrocious position. The classic, well, are you going to sit down and have a discussion with Hitler, or are you going to pull out a 45 and put one between his eyes? But what I worry is that there's some extreme cases where I guess I could get behind the case for no, we're not going to talk with this person. We're not going to do anything with this person. We're going to do everything to destroy this person because they're just a incredibly evil and dangerous person. That is not the case in 99.999% of humanity. Most of us are just regular people going about our lives, and the more discourse breaks down, the more we can't be civil to each other, the more we can't have discussions. Once you start moving more towards those gray areas where there's maybe possibly a good argument on both sides, and things start getting a little bit more clouded, where we need that nuance. It's really important, and we seem to be losing that the ability to have those kinds of discussions. And if we end up losing that ability to have discussions, well, the only next step that there is for conflict resolution is violence, and that never ends well for anyone. That's what worries me.
I think you're also speaking to another challenge that we have, which is binary thinking. We've addressed it, I think, using other language. But the world does not fit on a single blank. Here's a great example, okay? I hate the National Rifle Association, and I'm grieved by gun violence in this country. And I think it's crazy and obscene that there are more guns than citizens in the United States, and that, more and more with the deregulation, there are fewer and fewer restrictions or regulations on lethal firearms, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's me, okay? That's where I fall. I'm also a licensed gun owner, and I have 2 firearms, and I like to go to the range, and I shoot targets, and I keep them in a gun safe in my house, and they're properly cared for, and I'm trained to use them. So I'm not anti-gun, okay? But I think it's stupid to just be an absolutist about the Second Amendment, which was written during a time when people could, I think, shoot maybe 3 rounds a minute after manually loading. I mean, it was a different world. They didn't have automatic weapons or semi-automatic. I mean, it's a whole different thing. And the idea that, well, we're going to be dogmatic and say that I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. I'm not that guy either, right? Well, this is messy. This is a complex and nuanced way of approaching firearms in the United States. Because I'm a peace-loving guy, I'm grieved at the idea. I would never ever dream of using my firearms in any other way. If I would use it in a pinch in the case of home protection, if it was a life and death thing and I worried that our lives were in danger, but I'm not carrying them out of my hips. I don't think you need a gun to go to Starbucks. I think all that's the same. Well, so what you just heard in the last 90 seconds is an extremely messy and complex and nuanced way of approaching firearms in the United States, okay? But if you live in the binary world, everybody who has a gun is a guy who's compensating, who loves violence, who's running around with the pickup and the Confederate flag and the country song playing in the background and supports the insurrection and is indirectly responsible for all the school shootings and hates public safety. And, you hear that. Or you hear the other people who say that anybody who is against guns is anti-freedom and hates the Constitution and blah, blah, blah. So we put ourselves in these little boxes. We become binary thinkers. And I just think, wow, without nuance, you just aren't going to understand complex people. And if you don't understand them, you're certainly not going to be able to have meaningful discussions with them. This works for religion. It works with political positions. It works with philosophical divisions. It works in terms of our values. You can't fit me in a box. I can't fit you in a box. Let's stop trying to fit each other into boxes. Let's put away the binary model and let's begin some in-depth, layered of the onion understanding about what makes people tick and why.
So, Isandring and I have gotten, because Isandring actually also owns several firearms, and I'm for the most part against the Second Amendment. So we've had that discussion, but I like to think that we've also gone for the nuance in each other's view. You had said something that I thought was interesting. Well, I was going to ask. So it seems like you've had some experience with this, and you had said that you had even been that guy at least for a little while, and you decided to start being vigilant yourself. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. What got it so that you felt that this was important for your either well-being, well, for your well-being, let's just say for your well-being, to start to address these issues yourself, and did it have to do with your deconversion, or was it something separate?
By this, you mean lowering the temperature of my interactions online?
Yes, I think let's start with that. Yeah.
Well, I really needed some time once I got out of religion. And this is so common from people who come out of a fundy faith, and I get it. You have so much to say, and you want to engage at 1,000 miles an hour. And, it's just you're charged up with electricity over all the things that are going on in your head and your heart. And I think I was better as an activist 4 or 5 years after I first said the word atheist. I kind of wish I had taken more time to get to know myself, to calm down, to allow the anger to subside a little bit, to give me a little more perspective, because that's when I started to become more effective. I used to mock believers, you walk around with invisible friends. It's time to grow up, people, that kind of thing. And I patted myself on the back for the fact that I didn't have invisible friends. And, that after a few years, I realized, man, I did for about 30 years. I did. Why am I approaching people in such a petty way? And is it producing results? The answer time and again was no. I didn't change anybody's mind. I didn't open any doors. I didn't advance the discourse. Mostly, these were just sort of gotchas. And the people who already agreed with me, who enjoyed my flavor of snark, they lined up right behind me in the comments section, and I felt validated. And likes and shares, likes and shares. Look at me, everybody. We sure showed them. So I get the endorphin rush. I get paid for that. But only short term. At the end of the day, I was more frustrated. I felt like I'd taken that one step forward, but I drifted further back. The world wasn't changing, not in the way that I'd hoped it was changed. And I didn't like me. I just began to realize that I am becoming scar tissue. And why is that? And once I realized that the dehumanizing and all the fighting and all the rage and all the nastiness and all the bickering and the squabbling and the clawing and all of that stuff was affecting me in that way, it had made me less effective as an activist. It had made me more unpleasant to be around as a husband. It had made me unhappier in my heart as a human being. Once I realized kind of what was happening, that began to change how and why I engage. And so that's one of the reasons that, like on my personal pages, you'll see the occasional snark or whatever. But you'll also see a lot of, hey, check this out, or hey, this made me laugh, or here are pictures of my dogs, or Natalie and I went out on a date, and here's a photo of us, or I saw a great movie the other day. West Side Story is amazing. Go see it. Life stuff. Engaging people beyond this sort of obsessive, myopic, keyboard mashing awfulness that we see online. And it's changed my life. It's improved my life. And I think it's improved my efficacy with other people. I think I've had more success treating them with some charity than I ever had as treating them as a gotcha moment so that somebody could validate me in the comment section.
I've been called the Antichrist more times than I can count. And you laugh because it's one of the things that always gets me when somebody says that is actually the amount of ego that you have to have, that they are now, and they've meant it. I mean, they've meant it. This is not a thing. They've been, oh wow, I'm doing battle with the Antichrist, which has to be very self-aggrandizing. I think you're doing battle with the Antichrist, and it's Nick, which shock, I guess. But I hope you're shocked. The live chat should be shocked. I hope so. But
the forces of darkness are just royally screwed if you're the Antichrist. We can just put away our holy swords and books and just call it a day. I mean, we don't even have to phone it in.
I think that's probably true if I'm the leader of darkness. But it is this once again, this binary. I'm not just dealing with a person, right? I'm not dealing with they're saying things that I detest so much they must be the Antichrist himself. And so many of them think this, but then again, so many atheists too. Like, I'm not just dealing with an irrational belief. I'm dealing with this entire system that if I don't take it down will be the end of us. You've seen what they're trying to do in Texas. They're trying to destroy evolution in the books, the school books, and they're going to and so it just becomes this, I think it's all this all or nothing. I think, again, it's sort of, we all do it. And I really did have it was probably worth losing the point to get Isandring's comment.
That's all right.
Sorry about that.
I get, I've written a speech that I'll be giving in 2022 about the power of the lie. And when we see the power of untruths, horrible ideas, and how they result in action, right? We often are asked, I'm an atheist activist, well, why do you talk so much about religion? My sort of catch-all knee-jerk is, well, why do people opposed to cancer talk so much about cancer? It's just a stupid question, really. Of course we talk about religion because it's a bad idea. We hate the indoctrination of children, the stripping away of human rights, the waste of this life in anticipation of an afterlife that nobody's proven, the naming and guilting and blaming and shaming inside and throughout the Christian Bible, the bad history, the bad science, blah, blah, blah. And so, ideas matter, and we have to go out and defeat those ideas. But, there is a thinking out there that the enemy can't be reasoned with, so they must be decimated. This is something psychologists call motive attribution asymmetry, which takes us back to the binary model. My cause is righteous and good. Their cause is awful and terrible, and they are the enemy who cannot ever be reasoned with. As such, as they're beyond reason, they're lost causes. The only way to approach them is a blitzkrieg. We have to just obliterate them. And I've seen a lot of that. I'm just not convinced that overall it is an effective way to change the culture. I don't think going after all of this stuff, and what will happen then is the more dogmatic will say, well, these people are coming after the rights of Group X, this underdog group, and you're enabling the attackers of that group by being conciliatory or giving them any concession by not wanting to go and burn their lives down. And it makes conversations about this stuff nearly impossible because I'm not on their side. I'm not on the side of the anti-human rights activist. I'm not on the side of the white nationalist. I'm not on the side of the discriminatory hate mongers out. I'm not on their side. I'm not talking about our values now. What I am talking about is tactics. What tactics are going to be the most effective? Man, if we can't have a conversation about tactics, we are in real trouble. Because tactics are going to determine the success or failure of our campaigns. We have to talk about what is the best way to engage and to change, to defeat the bad, to enable and encourage the good. Tactics. And we have got to rediscover that, if we come after an idea, and there are other people, and again, this is a long answer, who will weaponize a worthy cause. So they'll take something, I don't know, I won't get specific, but let's call it a worthy human rights cause, okay? But the person who is promoting it, they might just be a terrible human being or toxic or whatever. What they'll do is they'll take this worthy, righteous cause and they'll stand behind it. And if you criticize the toxic person or their tactics or their mindset or how they behave toward other people or whatever, what they say is, oh, yeah, well, you must be an enemy of, and then they wave the flag of whatever their cause is. Well, you come after me, you must hate the rights of this oppressed group. You are now an enemy as well. Let's stick them in the trebuchet and kick them out of I mean, I understand how frustrating it is for people. And that's why, again, I have to go through my list. I take the breath and I stop and I stop. And then only after I go through a short list and sort of consider for a moment, have a moment of pause, do I choose to engage? And if somebody's engaging in bad faith, sometimes there's not a lot you can do except move on and set the better example.
Amen to that. Isandring, was there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
Thank you very much for coming on and discussing with it. I think it's important, especially in this day and age, and for the future of not only our country, but I think kind of the world in general. And don't worry, your belief that guns are mishandled in the United States doesn't mean that I think you're a horrible person. I still think you're a great and wonderful person, and we can disagree about lots of things. Even though I still think the Second Amendment should have been amended after World War I.
You and I probably have more in common than we have in disagreement. And I think beyond that, we probably have a tremendous concern for and love for people, and we want good to prevail. And the minutiae of those conversations are conversations that I think you and I could have in good faith. Maybe we could help show others that it is possible and that it can be done. I hope my answers on the show today haven't been laboriously long. It's what happens when you bring a radio host on. I tend to bloviate, but it has been enjoyable to be able to hang out and talk about these things, because I think they are the things that matter. And
I think it's. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just think it's great that I actually got to talk to you. I've wanted to talk to you for a while, and I actually finally got to do it today.
It was a lot of fun for me as well, and I want to thank everybody for watching and listening. And let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Mr. Andrews, if it hadn't been you bloviating, it would have been me, and I think the audience has heard more than enough of that. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you'll come back. Would love to have you back. But until then, I think we're going to be doing overtime, tomorrow? We're going to be covering everything that's been in the news. There's been a lot going on, the Trump stuff, COVID, of course. And then our normal After Dark on Friday call-in show. Anyone who wants to join us with that. Until then, thank you, Porpoise, for your super chats. Thank you, Isandring, as always. And Mr. Andrews, once again, we really appreciate you. It was really great to get finally a chance to meet you and to have you come on. So thank you, sir, very
My
very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
And good night, all. Welcome to In Time. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. We read all of your comments, and if you like this video, please don't forget to share.